So today we're going to talk about things that aspects and features of Spanish that we like better than English, as well as the reverse. Things about English that we prefer over Spanish. And to talk about this, I brought a very special guest. If you could please introduce yourself and where to find you on YouTube.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Joshua, and I am a content creator. I am a YouTuber. My YouTube channel is Spanish Blueprints, and let's see, I've been learning Spanish, well, technically, since I have been 13 years old, but hasn't been very consistent, kind of on and off, throughout the years. And after graduating college a few years ago, I've just been learning Spanish on my own. Currently living in Texas, but I am originally from Minnesota.
Very good. And this is something that we share in common. We're both of us, our first language is English, and we both have learned Spanish. It'll be interesting to see each other's perspectives on this. So I'm going to start off with one thing, and then please chime in. So there's a word in Spanish that I think we really need in English. Estadounidense.
Yes.
I can see by your smile, you know exactly where I'm going with this. So, of course, in English, we would say American. And so you'd say that, like if you were in Europe, or let's say you're down in Mexico and somebody asked you where you're from, if you're speaking in English, you'd say, I'm American, meaning you're from the United States. But it doesn't have the specificity that I would like. I often feel like I have to say, I'm a U.S. American because, people from Colombia and Canada and Mexico, they're all from America.
Yep.
And in Spanish, you can get really specific, estadounidense, which would be kind of like saying United Statesian, even though that's not really a word. But I think we need to make it a word.
I agree.
So how about you? What's an aspect or a detail about Spanish that you like, that you really enjoy over English?
Yeah, one aspect I really enjoy now after learning it is the differences in between the relationships between people. For example, I don't know if you have learned beforehand that with different verbs, for example, gustar, querer, y como amar, they're a little bit different versus in English. It's more complicated in Spanish. It's more complicated as in I had to learn it. But I think it's also a little bit more simple versus in English. We kind of say we love everything, but in Spanish it's a bit more detailed. There's more levels to relationships and things like that. So I think that's something that I wish we kind of had at least here in the US.
I think that's an excellent one. I did a video a long time ago over Valentine's Day where I talked about the different words for love in different languages. And it wasn't exclusively about Spanish, but I definitely included Spanish because I do feel like there's more powerful distinctions. With the word love, it's so overused. I love my spouse, I love my parents, but I also love video games. How is that the same verb?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's an excellent one. Okay, so here's another one that I like better in Spanish. And you said you live in Texas?
Yes.
Okay, so you might not feel the same way because I'm in California, and you have a word in Texas that we don't use in California that I think is an awesome word. So in Spanish, the word I'm talking about, ustedes.
Ustedes, okay.
Yeah, so in English we have you, and then at least where I live, you're more likely to say something like, if you want to make it plural, you'd have to say you guys. And I even find myself saying you guys to a group of women. And it can be kind of awkward sometimes. But it's never awkward in Spanish because you have usted and ustedes, or tú and ustedes. It's always very, very clear whether you're talking to one person or you're talking to a group of people. And but in Texas, in the area of Texas that you live in, do you guys say y'all?
Oh yeah, we do.
Yeah. See, I think that's a great answer because that's like the English version of ustedes. But we don't have that where if I said y'all, in California, they would just look at me like, okay, you don't sound like you're not from here.
Mhm.
But I think it's a great word. I think that all the dialects of English should start using it.
Yeah, I never made that connection before. That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, I say you guys to everybody, like you were saying as well. Like I say you guys, even if it's like a group of girls too. Because I'm saying like you girls,
Yes.
I don't know you guys. It's just kind of a little bit more
It
normal for
comes
me saying
out
that, I
before
guess.
I can think about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so how about you? What's something else that you like about Spanish?
So about Spanish, I would say I guess I just really love the different dialects in general.
Yeah.
The different dialects, different accents. I would have never imagined that there are so many. And they're very distinct. It's not like there's a little bit of difference. There's a lot of difference
Yeah.
in between each Spanish speaking country. So I think that's one thing that I really like because I've been learning a lot more, and just being able to connect with culture through that way by learning all the differences has been really fun, really educational, and it's really just opened my mind to a lot of different things.
So I'm curious, are you trying to focus in on a specific accent of Spanish, not accent, a specific dialect of Spanish when you're learning Spanish?
Not exactly. I mean, it's kind of off and on. Like I'm the type of language learner that I'm very sporadic. It's like one day I
Uh-huh.
could be doing one thing, the next thing I'm doing something else. So I try to, if I will say like two dialects that I'm trying to focus on are the Dominican and the Spanish dialect. So Spanish from Spain, but it's not like it's like consistent. It's really just whatever I
Yeah.
want to.
So I found that when I never thought about it for a long time. And when I was going to school, like I remember one college Spanish class I took where the textbook was very clearly European Spanish, just because of the words that it used and everything. And later I looked back and thought to myself, well, why would you do that? We live in California. We're like 2 hours from the border of Mexico, and the country that has the most number of Spanish speakers in the whole world. So I've tried to focus in on Mexican Spanish, not because I'm trying to exclude the other ones. I think that they're all really interesting, and I love learning about the differences. But my go-to word, I try to switch my go-to word to be the Mexican word when possible, just because
Mhm.
where I live, the majority of the time that my opportunities to speak in Spanish are primarily with people that speak the Mexican dialect. So here's one for me. The spelling. Oh my gosh, the spelling of Spanish is so much better than the spelling of English.
Oh yes, I agree.
So what for those that don't know enough Spanish to know why is the Spanish spelling so much easier than English? What is it about it?
Yeah, so Spanish is a phonetic language, which basically means like you sound it out exactly how you read it. So like if you learn the Spanish alphabet, you can kind of pronounce, like most words. But in English, it's not the same way. Like we have, let's see, I'm trying to think of one. Stuff and rough. So
Yeah.
so stuff and rough they have the same exact ending, but the letters are completely different. So like it doesn't make any sense. Like why would you have the same letters even though they have completely different pronunciations? But in Spanish, it's not the same way. Like conversación. Like I can pronounce that word pretty easily. But if I say conversation in English, for example, it's not the same way. You would think for conversation there would be an sh in that word, but there's not. But just
Yeah.
but there's just a t. But I'm like that's not sh. So it's like that.
There's times where I feel really bad for people that are learning English as a second language because our spelling
Mhm.
system is so completely complicated. And I know there's reasons for it. I mean, part of it is that it keeps intact a lot of the morphological relationships, meaning that, you look at a word and you can tell what it means, even though it doesn't sound like that. Um, and it kind of helps all the different dialects maintain a single writing system because, like in parts of Britain, they may say, don't step on the grass. rather than grass like we would.
Mhm.
Well, there's no need to change the letter because they just interpreted their way and we interpreted our way, and we all share the same spelling. So I get why we have the spelling system, but boy, is it easier in Spanish. And what's great about in Spanish is that if I'm reading and I come across a word I've never heard of, that's okay. I know how to say it.
Yep.
You just say it like it's spelled. Imagine if you're learning English and you don't have much vocabulary yet, and you come across a word like transportation. There's so many different ways that you might say it. You have to know the word in order to be able to read it.
Exactly.
Yeah. So anything else that comes to mind when you think about things about Spanish that you like better?
That's a good question. I think that's all I got for right now.
Okay. So I'll give you a couple others. I love the upside down question marks
Yes.
and the upside down exclamation marks that you put at the beginning of the sentence.
Yep.
And at first, when I was learning Spanish, I didn't realize that was special or really added something. I just thought, oh, this is kind of redundant. You have it on both sides. Why do you need it on both sides? Well, I started to realize that there's times in English where you read through the whole sentence, and it's not till you get to the end that you realize, oh, this is an exclamation. Like, I need to go back and reread it and say it with emotion. Or I need to say it again with a rising intonation because it's a question. And I didn't know that until I got to the end. With Spanish, you always know right from the beginning.
Yep, that's a good one.
Another thing I really like I think is really cool is, when you're first learning Spanish, sometimes you think about all the conjugations at the end of the words. Yo hablo, tú hablas, ella habla, nosotros hablamos. Like, you get overwhelmed at first with all the different endings. But as you grow in your Spanish, you start to realize that, oh, well, I can just use the endings and I don't need to use the pronoun at all. I don't need to say yo hablo español. I can just say hablo español. Or, nos hablamos en inglés y en español. And it's not necessary. You can leave off the subject, which you're not allowed to do in English. We rarely do that. So I think that's kind of a cool thing. So what about the other way around? Is there anything about English that you like better than Spanish?
If I would have to say, is probably the fact that we don't really have like feminine and masculine vocabulary. I would say that as far as like learning the language, because that
Yeah.
for me was like very difficult. That, then another one to add would be the fact that we put, let's see, the adjective, no, the noun. I'm getting it mixed up right now. It's a big house. Yeah, the adjective before the noun versus like the
Yes.
noun before the adjective. So that aspect is like incredibly difficult to learn in Spanish. For me, it took a very long time. Even right now, I still mix that up a lot. So I think the fact that we don't have to do that makes it a little simpler.
Yeah. The adjectives coming at the end, and of course it doesn't always come at the end, but it generally comes at the end.
Does.
The fact that it doesn't always is kind of what makes it a little complicated. Like, there are some words where you put it before, you put it after, it means something different. And so it can get kind of complicated. Like, es un gran hombre or es un hombre grande. He's a great man or he's a big man. It doesn't mean the same thing at all, but being cognizant of where to put that adjective. But I do think it's kind of cool that you get to say what it is and then describe it. But it does take some getting used to, for sure. And then what was the other thing you said? Because I had a comment on it, but I forget what you said. What was the other thing about English that you like better?
Oh yeah, feminine and masculine vocabulary.
That's it. Grammatical gender. Yeah, grammatical gender. What an unneeded complication.
Yeah.
What the heck is that all about? And I know there's so many languages, especially European languages, that have it, and
Yep.
it's just normal. If you look into the history of English, English actually used to have it as well, but we've dropped it, and we've gotten by just fine without it. There are some holdouts, though. Like it's very rare exception, but like in English, when we talk about a boat, you can say, "Oh, have you?" Oh, that's a beautiful boat. She's a beauty,
Yep.
but that's so rare. It is definitely nice to not have to deal with that complication.
Or sometimes when you're talking about like maintenance type of like supplies and things like that, maybe you'll say, oh, the male end and female end, but like that's kind of it.
Yeah. So what about I'm curious what you think if this is a positive or not so positive, because here's the difference between the two languages. In Spanish, we just have you, and we've already discussed the plural and singular. But in Spanish, you also have tú and usted, the familiar and the formal. Do you think that's an advantage or a disadvantage?
I think it's an advantage. I definitely see that as being a positive because I feel like you can express yourself in a different way to depending on the relationship that you have with the person. So I like being able to say usted because it's something that it's more formal that you're going to say to someone that you don't know. If you're working or whatnot. To express more. Also, what I'm looking for to express. ¿Qué es la palabra que yo quiero decir? Es como más honesto, más humilde, no sé,
Okay.
algo así.
Okay.
So that's what I feel about it. I think it's definitely an advantage just because you can kind of separate again the relationships like we were talking about
Uh-huh.
earlier.
I had I guess I ultimately agree with you. But even though I'm years into learning Spanish, I do encounter times where I'm not sure which to use.
Oh, me too. All the time,
So I
actually.
I've had that just recently, and I was going into a 7-Eleven, and I go into the 7-Eleven all the time. Like it's kind of my routine. I play tennis, and then I stop by the 7-Eleven, and I get this, Diet Coke with vanilla. And I started to realize that this woman that's working there speaks Spanish because she would speak Spanish with other customers. So I'm like, okay, like light bulb always goes off. Anybody I can find to practice with, español solamente. So I started speaking Spanish with her, and then I realized like, oh, I'm using usted with her. And now I'm like, oh, I better listen carefully. Like, what is she using with me? And then I'm like, okay, I don't, in a way, she's a stranger, but yet I've seen her every day for a couple of years. So she's not really a stranger. So,
Mhm.
like, I want to use usted because I want to show her respect. But at the same time, I want her to feel like I think that we're at the same level. Like, I don't want her to think that, I think I'm better than her. And like all these conflicting feelings are going through my head. And I'm like, I don't know what to do.
You mind if I add another story to that?
Please.
So yeah, I went to a birreria recently, and my waitress, she's a little bit younger than me. Well, she looked a little bit younger than me, right?
Okay.
But of course, with me, she used usted. That's usually what people use,
Yeah.
at least from my experience. Like if you're at a business or something like that. So she used usted with me, but I was thinking, okay, maybe I should say "cómo estás" instead of saying "cómo está usted" because she's a little bit
Mhm.
younger. Even though I don't know her, I was thinking, oh, I should use "cómo estás" because she seems younger than me. So I'm like, oh wait, should I say that? Or is it more respectful? That's what I wanted to say before. Respectful. Is it more respectful to say usted, even though she is younger? Because I know you
Yeah.
use it a lot as well with people who are older. So I was like, oh, I ended up saying "cómo estás" instead of "cómo está usted." So that's
Yeah.
so
you
many
know,
times.
I after that happened to me, I went to a friend of mine, and he's a personal trainer I've worked out with, and his native language is Spanish. He's from Mexico. And so I told him the whole situation and asked him about it, and he really brought to light the positive aspect of having the two words, because he said Well, you can have a really nice moment when you say to her, "Oh, por favor, tú te arme," or dime tú, and communicating that hey, we're equals here. Say tú with me, and it can be a real nice moment with two people. But
Okay.
not having that background, like I have spoken Spanish with many, many, many different people because I used to be a teacher.
Okay.
And I was a teacher in the city of Anaheim where majority of the parents spoke Spanish. So I would always speak Spanish with them, but it was very clear, like, I'm going to use usted with them. These are the
Mhm.
parents of the students. Like, I want to show as much respect as possible, and they always did to me as well. So even though I had a lot of practice with Spanish, I didn't really have a lot of practice with having to decide. And it was also very clear, with students, they're a lot younger than you and you're the teacher, so you use tú. So it was just so clear cut that I almost think it's kind of funny that I'm so late in the game to really have this feel like it's a new experience.
Yeah.
Ok, ¿qué más? ¿Qué más hay que prefieres en el inglés o en el español?
Lo que sea, lo que quieras.
Okay. Well, I have one more question for you. Is before we go. So thank you. I think it's been a lot of fun comparing the two, and it's great to hear somebody else's perspective. One of the things that I've mentioned to you that I feel that there are times where I feel like I'm an imposter speaking Spanish. Even though I literally have a teaching credential from the state of California where I passed a test that says that I'm fluent. And I've had years and years and years of speaking Spanish with people where I would never switch to English. I would just stay in Spanish. But still to this day, I have to remind myself, it's like, no, no, no. Es real. Tú hablas español. Y no
Ajá.
es necesario cambiarme del idioma. Me puedo quedar en español. Y por eso lo hablo. Yo lo hablo.
Ujú.
Pero de todos modos, de vez en cuando me siento como impostor. ¿Y tú? How
Sí,
about you?
sí, yo había sentido lo mismo, en verdad, casi cada semana. Y hoy día, una de las razones por las cuales es que yo hablo con muchos mexicanos, ¿ok?
Sí.
Hoy en día, porque yo soy nuevo a Texas, acabo de mudarme acá, entonces para mí es muy diferente, porque no estoy acostumbrado a hablar con muchos mexicanos, entonces me siento como un imposter o impostor,
Impostor, sí.
no me siento impostor, como no me siento mexicano, y también me cuesta entenderlos también, o entenderles. Yo no tengo un acento mexicano, es más dominicano.
Uh,
Entonces es un poco difícil para conectarme con ellos. Entonces a veces me siento como que, ok, no soy mexicano, no tengo el acento mexicano, no sé mucho de la cultura de México.
sí,
Entonces no sé cómo, no puedo hablar, no puedo entender nada. Entonces me siento menos. Entonces sí, yo definitivamente yo siento esto muchísimo hoy en día.
sí,
Como no soy aparte o no estoy aparte de ellos, de su cultura.
mm,
Y la misma cosa me pasó en la República Dominicana cuando yo fui hace 2 años, porque nunca había ido ahí, no sabía nada de su cultura, de este dialecto, no hablé como ellos de ninguna manera. Entonces me siento muy, muy mal porque no pude entenderles otra vez, no pude conectarme muchísimo con ellos. Entonces, como una mezcla de mi forma de hablar y también el conocimiento de la cultura,
sí.
eh, porque me siento así. Entonces, sí, me pasa muchísimo.
Afortunadamente, nosotros los dos vivimos en un lugar hispanoparlante.
Sí,
Ah, hay mucha gente en la California, tanto en la California como en Texas,
claro.
que hablan español. Y si viviéramos en otras partes de los Estados Unidos, no es necesariamente verdad que vamos a tener tantas oportunidades de practicarlo. Y
Es
esto
verdad.
me alegra.
Yo también.
All right, very good. So thank you so much for joining me. So your YouTube channel is called Spanish Blueprints. Oh, and I've also real quick before we go, I love that name. Why did you choose that name?
I was kind of inspired by like another podcast that I heard before, and I guess it kind of just stuck. I was like Spanish Blueprints. I'm like, oh, that sounds like, like I'm creating my own plan for making Spanish,
Yeah.
and I want to be able to help others, make their own plan to learn Spanish. So that's really how it came to be, and it stuck.
I think that's a really cool name, and I think that's exactly from the videos that I've seen on your channel. That's exactly what you're doing. Is you're helping people create their blueprint for learning Spanish. And I encourage people not just to go to your YouTube channel, subscribe, and watch, not just if they're a Spanish learner, because I feel that even though you're specializing in Spanish, so much of the content that you put out on your channel is really about language learning. It just happens to be that Spanish is the language that you're focusing in on. But, if I'm a French learner or a Mandarin learner or, Armenian, it doesn't matter. So much about language learning is universal, and you talk about so many universal concepts about language learning.
Absolutely. Yeah, I try to touch on, a lot of the topics I think are very important, as a language learner, because, there's so many aspects of it. There's so many things that we face. So I try to tackle like every little detail as much as possible.
Yeah, and it's there's so much. It's such a complicated process that there really are endless angles to talk about.
Yep.
It's what keeps us coming back for more, for sure. Well, thank you. So if I'm on my computer, tell me where to go. And by the way, I want to make sure that the viewers know that I'm gonna leave link down in the description so that they can go straight to your channel as well. But please tell us how to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you just go on YouTube and you search Spanish Blueprints, I should come up. There really isn't like any other YouTube channels with that name unnecessarily. So if you just type in Spanish Blueprints, I'll pop up. Same thing on Instagram. On Instagram, I'm at Spanish Blueprints.
Very good. I'll make sure to leave a link for both of those. Well, thank you so much, Joshua. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you for having me.